Just after 2:30 in the morning on May 14, 2008, a 19-year-old college student named Brandon Swanson said two words into his phone. "Oh shit." And then the line went quiet. No crash, no scream, no struggle, just silence. For the 47 minutes before that moment, Brandon had been on the phone with his parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, while standing somewhere along a dark stretch of rural Minnesota. His car was stuck in a ditch. He wasn't injured. He sounded calm, alert, like a kid who had made a small mistake and needed help getting home. As they spoke, Brian and Annette were already driving, back roads, gravel shoulders, long empty highways, searching for their son. They followed Brandon's directions exactly. They turned where he told them to turn. They slowed where he told them to slow. At one point, they stopped. Brian flashed his headlights into the darkness. Brandon didn't see them, so Brandon flashed his own lights. Brian and Annette saw nothing. They tried again. Headlights, hazards, honking the horn. Through the phone, Brian could hear Brandon honk back. But standing there in the night air, there was no sound at all. No headlights, no taillights, no outline of a car, just empty road and open fields. What made it worse was this. When Brandon described what he could see around him, flat land, long roads, darkness stretching out in every direction, it sounded exactly like what his parents were seeing too. It felt like they should be close enough to wave, close enough to shout, but they weren't. Brandon told them he believed he was near Lind, Minnesota, a small town just southwest of Marshall. He was sure of it, so sure that when waiting became frustrating, he made a decision that would be the last confirmed action of his life. He left the car. He began walking toward lights he could see in the distance, convinced they belonged to Lind. Brian stayed on the phone with his son as he drove toward town to meet him. Brandon talked as he walked. He mentioned climbing over fences. He heard hearing water nearby. His voice never sounded panicked, never confused. And then, without warning, Brandon stopped mid-sentence. "Oh shit." The call did not drop immediately. The line stayed open, dead silent, until his parents finally hung up and tried calling back, again and again and again. Each call went straight to voicemail. By morning, Brandon Swanson was gone, and when police later pulled his phone records, they discovered something that made the entire night feel impossible. Brandon hadn't been near Lind at all. His phone had been connecting to a cell tower near Taunton, Minnesota. That's 25 miles away, in the wrong direction. So how do you stay on the phone with your parents for nearly an hour while everyone is searching the wrong town, and then vanish into the night without leaving a single trace?
Before Brandon Swanson became a name attached to a mystery, he was a teenager from Marshall, Minnesota, the kind of place where people recognize your truck before they recognize your face. Brandon was born on January 30th, 1989, and he grew up in southwestern Minnesota, surrounded by farmland, long roads, and a pace of life that didn't rush you into adulthood. Marshall wasn't a dangerous town. It wasn't chaotic. It was predictable, quiet, the kind of place where parents expected their kids to come home. By all accounts, Brandon was close with his family. His parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, were deeply involved in his life, and he shared a strong bond with his younger sister. This wasn't a fractured household. This wasn't a kid drifting away unnoticed. Brandon talked to his parents. He checked in. He made plans, and he followed through on them. In school, Brandon stood out not because he was loud, but because he was curious. He loved reading. He liked learning how things worked. Teachers remembered him as thoughtful, the type of student who paid attention even when no one was watching. When he graduated from Marshall Senior High School in 2007, his path didn't take him far from home, not yet. Instead, Brandon enrolled at Minnesota West Community and Technical College, attending classes on the Canby campus, about 30 miles away.
He chose a program focused on renewable energy and wind turbines, a field that was just beginning to gain attention at the time. It wasn't glamorous, but it was practical, forward-looking. Brandon liked that. For a year, he made that drive regularly, Canby to Marshall, Marshall to Canby, a straight shot down State Highway 68. He knew every mile of it, every curve, every grain elevator that rose out of the flatland like a landmark. And this wasn't where his plans ended. That fall, Brandon was preparing for something bigger. He had been accepted to Iowa Western Community College, more than 250 miles away. It would be the first time he'd truly be on his own. New city, new people, a new routine. And he was excited about it. He talked about it. He looked ahead. There were no signs that Brandon wanted to disappear, no indication he was unhappy, no evidence that he was trying to leave his life behind. Everything pointed forward. Which is why what happened next feels so wrong in hindsight. Because when people look back on the night Brandon vanished, there's one detail that refuses to sit quietly: an hour and a half. That's the amount of time no one can account for between when Brandon left the party in Canby and when he finally called his parents at 1:54 a.m. Where he was during that window, what he saw, and what might have shifted his sense of direction, those questions sit at the center of everything. And there's another detail, smaller, quieter, but just as unsettling. Something Brandon mentioned seeing in the distance that night. Something that may explain why he believed he was somewhere he wasn't. Because this case doesn't get stranger later, it starts strange.
May 13th, 2008 was supposed to be simple. It was the last day of classes at Minnesota West Community and Technical College. For students on the Canby campus, it marked the end of the academic year. And for Brandon Swanson, it marked the completion of his certificate program. There were no exams looming, no deadlines left, just the relief that comes when a chapter closes cleanly. That night wasn't about recklessness, it was about celebration. Brandon began his evening in Lind, Minnesota, a small town roughly 7 miles southwest of Marshall. What's often described as a party there was closer to a quiet get-together. No crowded house, no chaos. By most accounts, there were 5 or 6 people total. Friends later said Brandon had 1 drink, maybe 2 at most. He didn't seem impaired, he wasn't loud, he wasn't unsteady. Nothing about his behavior raised concern. At some point later in the evening, Brandon made a decision that would send him in the opposite direction of home. He drove northwest to Canby, about 35 miles away, to attend another gathering. A friend and classmate was preparing to move away, and Brandon wanted to say goodbye. This second party was more active. Alcohol was more available. Friends remember Brandon having 1 or 2 additional drinks. Again, nothing that stood out. When he spoke, he made sense. When he walked straight. When he left, no one stopped him. He departed Canby sometime around midnight. Under normal circumstances, that drive back to Marshall would take 30 to 40 minutes. Brandon knew the route by heart. It was a straight, familiar stretch of road along State Highway 68, a highway he traveled nearly every day for school. There were no confusing intersections, no complicated turns, no reason to get lost. And yet, Brandon did not call his parents at 12:40 a.m. He did not call them at 1 a.m. He did not call them at 1:30 a.m. He called them at 1:54 a.m. That missing window, nearly an hour and a half, has never been explained. No witnesses place Brandon anywhere during that time. No receipts, no phone activity, no confirmed stops. Just an empty stretch of time between leaving a party and asking for help. What we do know is this. By the time Brandon picked up his phone, his Chevrolet Lumina was already stuck in a ditch. He told his parents he wasn't hurt. He told them the car wasn't damaged. He told them he believed he knew where he was. And that belief, where Brandon thought he was when he made that call, would soon become one of the most troubling elements of the entire case.
because when he finally reached out for help, he was absolutely convinced he was somewhere he wasn't. At 1:54 a.m., Brandon Swanson finally called home. His parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, were asleep when the phone rang. It was late, but not late enough to trigger fear. When they answered, Brandon's voice was steady. He didn't sound hurt, he didn't sound panicked. He told them he had driven his Chevrolet Lumina off the road and into a ditch. The car was stuck. That was it. No injuries, no damage, just inconvenience. He asked them to come get him. Brian and Annette didn't hesitate. They got dressed, climbed into their pickup, and started driving. Brandon stayed on the phone as they headed out into the night, following the directions he gave them. The call didn't stay perfectly clear. There were moments when the connection dropped or crackled, but each time Brandon called back. He stayed with them, talking, waiting. At first, it all felt manageable. Brandon told them he believed he was near Lind, Minnesota. Brian thought he knew exactly where Brandon meant. It was familiar territory, a short drive. They should be there any minute. But when they arrived, there was no car in the ditch. They drove past the spot again, still nothing. They turned around and came back. Empty road, open fields, darkness stretching out in every direction. Brian asked Brandon to flash his headlights. Brandon did. Brian and Annette saw nothing. So they tried it the other way. Brian flashed his headlights into the night and asked Brandon if he could see them. Brandon said no. Next, they tried the horn. Brian honked. Brandon didn't hear it. Then Brandon honked his own horn. Through the phone, Brian could hear it clearly. Standing on the road, though, there was no sound at all. No headlights, no taillights, just darkness. What made the situation harder to understand was the conversation itself. When Brian asked Brandon what he could see, the description sounded familiar. Flat land, long roads, fields on either side. It matched what Brian and Annette were seeing almost exactly. It felt like they should be close enough to wave, close enough to shout, but they weren't. If they were that close, why couldn't they see each other? If Brandon was on the wrong road, why did everything around him sound the same? And then there were the lights. Brandon told his parents he could see lights in the distance, not nearby, far off, a glow on the horizon. He believed they belonged to Lind. The longer they searched without finding each other, the more confident he became that he had given the right directions and that his parents must be in the wrong place. Tension crept into the call. Waiting wasn't working. Searching wasn't working. Brandon didn't want to sit by the car anymore, so he made another decision. He told his parents he was going to leave the car and walk toward the lights. Brian didn't like the idea, but Brandon insisted. He said he'd meet his dad at the parking lot of a bar on the edge of Lind. Brian turned the truck around and started driving toward town. He stayed on the phone with his son as Brandon began walking. As Brandon moved, the details changed. He talked about climbing over fences. He mentioned hearing water nearby. Brian asked him to stay on the road. Brandon said he was taking shortcuts, cutting across fields, trying to get there faster. They kept talking. Minute after minute passed. The night stayed quiet. They're both right, and somehow they're both wrong. By now, the plan had already changed. Brandon Swanson was no longer waiting beside his car. He had made up his mind. Sitting in the dark, watching his parents drive back and forth without finding him felt pointless. Whatever went wrong with the directions, he believed it would be faster to fix it himself. So Brandon started walking. He told his father he could still see lights in the distance. He believed they were coming from Lind. From where he stood, the glow looked steady, familiar, close enough to reach on foot. Brian Swanson stayed on the phone as his son left the car behind. He listened to Brandon's footsteps change as the terrain changed. Gravel gave way to grass. The sound of his voice shifted as the open space swallowed it. At first, the walk didn't sound dangerous. Brandon was talking normally. He was responsive. He answered questions. But almost immediately, Brian noticed something that made him uneasy. Brandon wasn't staying on the road. Instead of following the shoulder, Brandon said he was cutting across fields, shortening the distance, avoiding backtracking. Brian told him to stay where the road was clear. Brandon pushed back. He said the road curved away from the lights. He said the fields went straight toward them. As Brandon kept moving, he mentioned fences. Not one, more than one. He described climbing over them as he went, the metal rattling briefly before going quiet again. Brian could hear the effort in his voice as Brandon adjusted his footing, but there was still no panic, no urgency, just determination. Then Brandon mentioned something else. He said he could hear water. That caught Brian's attention. There hadn't been any mention of water before. Brandon didn't say he was near a river. He didn't say he was crossing one, just that he could hear it somewhere nearby. Brian asked where exactly he was. Brandon couldn't say. The longer the call went on, the more the situation shifted. This was no longer a stuck car and a missed turn. This was a teenager alone in unfamiliar farmland, navigating obstacles he couldn't fully see, guided by distant lights that never seemed to get closer. Now it isn't just a stranded car. Now it's a teenager walking alone across farmland at night. Brian's frustration started to creep into his voice. He told Brandon again to stop cutting through fields, to wait, to stay put. But Brandon was convinced he was making progress. From his perspective, the lights were still there, still fixed ahead of him. And the more he talked, the more it sounded like he was heading toward something he couldn't see. The call continued as Brandon walked. There were brief pauses when he focused on climbing or stepping down, moments when the phone brushed against his jacket, moments when the night filled the silence between words. Then, at around 2:30 a.m., Brandon interrupted himself. By the time the call reached 47 minutes, the night had thinned out around Brandon Swanson. His footsteps came less frequently now. The wind filled the spaces between his words. When he spoke, it was brief, practical updates, half-finished thoughts. He was still moving, still convinced he was getting closer. Brandon Swanson stayed with him on the line, driving slowly, scanning roads that no longer felt familiar. The plan, if there still was one, was simple. Get to Lind, meet in the parking lot, bring Brandon home. The call continued. Then it didn't. In the middle of a sentence, Brandon stopped. There was no build-up, no warning, just two words. "Oh shit," and then nothing. The line didn't disconnect right away. It stayed open. No crash, no struggle, no sound of water, just an open line filled with the low hum of night. Brian called out for his son. No answer. He waited. Still nothing. Eventually, he hung up and called back. Once, twice, 3 times, 4, 5, 6. Each call went straight to voicemail. The phone hadn't shattered. It hadn't gone dead mid-signal. It was simply no longer being answered. Brian and Annette Swanson spent the rest of the night searching, driving roads they had already driven, calling friends, hoping for anything that would make sense of those final seconds. By the time the sun rose over the fields, the hope that Brandon would simply appear had faded. That morning they went to the police, and what they were told, after explaining the call, the silence, and those last 2 words, would eventually reach far beyond their family. It would change how missing adults are treated in Minnesota. Morning came quietly. The same roads that had been empty hours earlier now sat under daylight, ordinary again. Fields stretched out as they always had. Birds moved through the air. Nothing about the landscape suggested that a young man had vanished into it just a few hours before. But for Brian and Annette Swanson, the night hadn't ended. By 6:30 a.m., with no callback, no message, and no sign of Brandon anywhere, they went to the Lind Police Department to report their son missing. They explained the call. They described the ditch. They repeated the last words. They tried to make the urgency clear. What they heard in response stopped them cold. They were told that it wasn't unusual for young men Brandon's age to stay out all night, that sometimes college students didn't come home, that it was possible Brandon simply didn't want to be found.
At one point, Annette Swanson would later recall an officer telling her that Brandon had a right to be missing. To Brian and Annette, that phrase didn't sound procedural. It sounded final. They pushed back immediately. They explained again that the call hadn't ended normally, that Brandon hadn't said goodbye, that the line hadn't gone dead, it had gone quiet. They told officers that Brandon had been walking through fields in the dark, that he had mentioned fences, that he had mentioned water. They weren't asking for speculation, they were asking for help. Hours passed before a search around Lind was finally initiated. Officers looked through town. They checked roads and nearby areas. There was no sign of Brandon, no abandoned car, no footprints, no witnesses, nothing. As the morning wore on, the situation grew heavier. What the Swansons felt instinctively, that something was wrong, was not reflected in the response they were getting. But the biggest twist wasn't the police response. It was what investigators would soon discover when they stopped relying on assumptions and started looking at data. Because when Brandon's phone records were pulled later that day, they would reveal a truth that changed the entire case. Brandon Swanson hadn't been near Lind at all.
Up to this point, everything about Brandon Swanson's disappearance had been built around one assumption: that he was near Lind, Minnesota. That assumption guided the search. It shaped every mile driven. It framed every question his parents were asked. But later that morning, investigators took a step that quietly unraveled the entire night. They pulled Brandon's cell phone records. When those records came back, they told a very different story. The calls Brandon made to his parents had not been connecting through towers near Lind. They were being routed through a cell tower near the intersection of County Routes 3 and 10 outside the town of Minneota. That placed Brandon near Taunton, Minnesota, not 7 miles away, not even 10, 25 miles away, in the wrong direction. Suddenly, the night had to be replayed from the beginning. The familiar landmarks, the directions that should have worked, the reason Brian and Annette never found their son, no matter how carefully they followed his instructions. They were searching the right way, just in the wrong town. Law enforcement shifted focus immediately. Deputies began searching the rural area near Taunton along State Highway 68, the same road Brandon would have taken home from Canby. And it didn't take long before they found something that confirmed the phone data. Brandon's Chevrolet Lumina sat in a ditch off a gravel road near the Lincoln County line. The car wasn't wrecked, it hadn't rolled, it hadn't struck anything at speed. Instead, it appeared to have become hung up on an incline, with part of the vehicle lifted just enough that the wheels couldn't grip the ground properly. It was the kind of situation that was frustrating, but not dangerous. The doors were open, the keys were missing, and there was no sign of Brandon anywhere nearby. The ground around the car offered little help. The area was covered in grass and loose gravel, which meant there were no clear footprints, no tracks pointing in any direction, no indication of which way Brandon had gone once he left the vehicle. For investigators, another detail stood out. From that exact stretch of land, a red light atop the Taunton grain elevator would have been visible at night, a steady glow rising above the flat farmland, a light that from a distance could easily be mistaken for a town, for Lind. This meant something unsettling. The entire 47-minute phone call, every flash of headlights, every honk of a horn, every mile Brandon's parents drove had unfolded while everyone involved was working from the wrong location, the wrong assumption, the wrong mental map. So if Brandon wasn't near Lind, if his car was near Taunton, and if he left that car on foot, so where did he walk from that ditch? Once Brandon Swanson's car was found near Taunton, the search stopped guessing and started following something concrete. Dogs. Specially trained bloodhounds were brought in to work from the exact spot where Brandon's Chevrolet Lumina sat in the ditch.
The handlers gave the dogs a scent and let them do what they were trained to do: filter everything else out and move with purpose. And they did. Almost immediately, the dogs began pulling west and northwest away from the car. Their pace was steady, confident. This wasn't wandering, this was direction. They led searchers down field roads, through open farmland that Brandon would have crossed on foot the night before. The path wasn't random, it followed a line, cutting across land, not back toward the highway. About 3 miles from where Brandon's car was found, the dogs reached an abandoned farm. Old structures, quiet ground, no signs of recent activity. From there, the scent continued again, turning toward a natural boundary that runs through the area, the Yellow Medicine River. The dogs followed the riverbank, tracking Brandon's scent along the edge. Deputies walked beside them, watching carefully as the trail narrowed. This was the moment the search began to feel urgent in a different way. Then the dogs reached the river. At the river's edge, the scent appeared to stop. For authorities, the implication was immediate. The river became the focus. Boats from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources were deployed. Gates were installed downstream. Deputies walked the banks on foot. Horses and all-terrain vehicles covered nearby land. An aerial team flew overhead, scanning the area from above. That morning, parts of the river were reported to be up to 10 feet deep, enough to conceal someone, enough to carry them downstream. But even then, questions remained. Annette Swanson would later point out something that never sat right with her. According to her, after reaching the water, one of the dogs didn't simply stop. It picked the scent back up on the other side, continued along the riverbank, crossed toward another gravel road, and then moved north toward the Yellow Medicine County line, where the trail finally ended. To Annette, that detail mattered. In her words, there really is nothing to indicate that he's in the river. Despite weeks of searching, boats in the water, deputies on foot, eyes in the air, nothing was found. No remains, no clothing, no personal items. Searches resumed months later, after crops were harvested and fields were cleared. Dogs returned and again picked up scents believed to belong to human remains, this time in areas northwest of Porter that hadn't been searched before. Over the years, the focus shifted farther toward Mud Creek, a tributary of the Yellow Medicine River. By 2011, more than 122 square miles had been searched. Still nothing. And then comes the part that keeps this case alive. No body, no phone, no glasses.
When a case reaches this point, no witnesses, no physical evidence, no clear ending, what remains are possibilities. Not guesses, not stories, possibilities grounded in what is known. The first and most commonly accepted is also the simplest: that Brandon Swanson met with an accident in the landscape itself. He was walking alone at night across unfamiliar farmland. There were fences he couldn't fully see, uneven ground, water nearby. He was legally blind in one eye, a fact that never affected his daily life, but could have mattered in darkness, where depth and distance are harder to judge. Add fatigue, add uncertainty about how much alcohol he may have consumed earlier. None of those details alone explain what happened, but together they form a setting where a single misstep could change everything. In rural Minnesota, the land doesn't preserve mistakes neatly. Animals move remains, weather alters terrain, farming equipment reshapes fields. Over time, evidence doesn't stay where it began. But that explanation raises a question that has never gone away. If it was an accident, where are the items that should have turned up? Brandon's phone, his glasses, anything. The second possibility centers on the Yellow Medicine River. The dogs tracked Brandon's scent directly to the water, that much is clear. At the time, parts of the river were deep enough to conceal someone. Drowning was considered immediately, and extensive searches followed: boats, bank walks, gates downstream. But this theory doesn't sit cleanly either. According to Annette Swanson, one of the dogs continued tracking after reaching the river. It crossed to the other side, it moved along the bank, it followed a path toward the county line before stopping. That behavior complicates the idea that Brandon entered the water and never came out. As Annette has said plainly, there really is nothing to indicate that he's in the river. Then there's the possibility no one wants to consider but can't fully dismiss: foul play. There is no evidence that Brandon encountered another person that night. No signs of a struggle, no damage to the car, no witnesses. The area was sparsely populated, crime rates were low. But low does not mean impossible. Law enforcement has never ruled it out entirely. The absence of evidence cuts both ways. It doesn't confirm anything, but it doesn't erase the possibility that Brandon crossed paths with someone at exactly the wrong moment. The final theory is the one Brandon's family rejects completely, that he chose to disappear. Brandon had plans. He was excited about the future. He was preparing to move away for school. And then there's the call itself. Staying on the phone with your parents for 47 minutes, guiding them, waiting for them, only to vanish without explanation? There is nothing about that behavior that suggests intent. It suggests confusion, urgency, a desire to be found. Which brings everything back to the same moment. 2 words, and then nothing.
When the searches slowed and the questions stopped multiplying, Brian and Annette Swanson were left with something they never expected: time. Time to replay the night. Time to examine every word that was said to them. Time to sit with a sentence they couldn't let go of: that Brandon had a right to be missing. Annette knew in her bones that something was wrong from the moment the phone went quiet. She knew it when morning came and Brandon still hadn't appeared. And she knew it when she stood in a police station trying to explain why this wasn't a case that could wait. So the Swansons decided not to let it end there. They began speaking with lawmakers, not because they believed it would bring Brandon home, but because they realized that what happened after he vanished could happen to someone else, someone whose family would also be told to wait, someone whose trail would go cold while procedure stood still. In Minnesota at the time, the law required immediate action when a child was reported missing. Not a person, not a young adult, a child. With the help of state legislators, including Marty Seifert in the House and Dennis Frederickson in the Senate, a bill was introduced to change that single word, to amend the law so that it no longer stopped at age 18. In May of 2009, less than a year after Brandon disappeared, Governor Tim Pawlenty signed the bill into law. It became known as Brandon's Law. The change required law enforcement to begin investigating missing adults promptly, to determine whether the circumstances were dangerous, and to coordinate immediately with other agencies. Police could no longer refuse a report because not enough time had passed, or because they believed the person may have chosen to leave. The law took effect in July of 2009. Brandon didn't come home. But because of him, families across Minnesota would never again be told to wait when they knew something was wrong. Other states took notice. Similar laws were passed elsewhere, modeled on the same principle, that urgency doesn't end at adulthood. Brandon disappeared, but the way missing adults are treated in Minnesota changed forever.
At the end of everything that's been searched, mapped, tracked, and questioned, the facts remain simple. Brandon Swanson has been missing since May 14, 2008. The last words anyone ever heard him say were, "Oh shit." Search teams covered more than 122 square miles of farmland, riverbanks, and back roads. Dogs followed his trail. Boats moved slowly through the water. Deputies walked fields step by step. And still, no body, no phone, no glasses, no trace. So the questions are left to us. Do you think Brandon was genuinely lost? Or did something happen after that last sentence? What do you make of the 25-mile gap? Confusion? a wrong turn, or something else entirely? And if you had been on that call, what sound would you expect to hear if someone fell into water? And why wasn't it there? If you have any information about the disappearance of Brandon Swanson, please contact the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office at 507-694-1664 or the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension at 651-793-7000. Sometimes, the most important answers are the ones that never arrive.